There would have been a time where I would have said that my purpose in life was to play AFL football. That's something I did a long time ago. That doesn't define me. I'd rather people know me and respect me for the work that I do today, but not one of the games of football in 14 and a half years saved a life. The work that I've done for almost 20 years has saved countless lives, has positively impacted thousands and thousands of people's lives. In 1996, I became a premiership player with North Melbourne. Anyone would have rightly assumed that that was an amazing experience and time in my life. And it is, I can say that. When I walked on up to the premiership dais and collected my premiership medal, I didn't want to live. I was grappling with a 4-year battle with suicidal ideation. By the end of today, this conversation finishes. 9 Australians have ended their life. 6 of the 9 are men. And it's not a male or female issue. It's a societal issue. One of the most important messages that I am committed to sharing with people is to...
Welcome back to the Out of Interest podcast, everybody. Those that are returning, thank you so much for tuning in again. Since you guys keep returning, why don't you guys give us a subscribe, give us a review on our podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, all that good stuff. Those that are new here, welcome. My name's Ali. I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by Mazza, like always. Today's guest, this topic is great. We've had it multiple times on the podcast, and I feel like a lot of people in this day and age love talking about it, love learning from it. And today's guest is for that as well. And but we're gonna take a different angle with this lovely gentleman over here, Wayne Schwass. Welcome to the Out of Interest podcast.
Thank you, Ali.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really good. Looking forward to having a conversation with both.
It's going to be a good chat. You kept saying you don't know what we're going to ask. Sometimes you don't. I don't even know what we're going to ask. You just go with the chat. We just go with the flow. And I want you to quickly introduce yourself, because you're an AFL player and then you went into mental health. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I got a follow-up question.
Okay.
Once you tie everything together, I got a really good follow-up question. We're gonna get straight into it. So please do introduce yourself.
Feels like I'm being set up here, Ali, but let's give it a go. First of all, thank you for the invitation of coming onto your podcast. By way of background, I played AFL football with North Melbourne and the Sydney Swans for 14 and a half years. A very long time ago, I played 282 games. Premiership player in 1996 with North Melbourne. I am lucky enough to be a 3-time best and fairest winner. So for those who don't know, in the Muslim community, that's the highest individual club award you can win at an AFL club. But through that process, I also dealt with very privately and silently for 10 years of my career with significant mental health conditions. And I lived with that for a long time, and I did everything I could during that period after I was diagnosed to hide the conditions. And those conditions were anxiety, depression and obsessive compulsive disorder. And those conditions had a significantly negative impact on my health and well-being. And decided to use a long time ago, I decided to use those experiences to create something which could have a positive impact on other people. And post-retirement, which was 2002, I then worked in the AFL media for 17 years. What's become really important but also really apparent since retiring is that I'm a purpose-driven person. And perhaps ignorantly, there would have been a time where I would have said that my purpose in life was to play AFL football. That's something I did a long time ago. That doesn't define me. I'd rather people know me and respect me for the work that I do today as opposed to what I did back then. And I don't say that to be disrespectful to my career, but not one of the games of football in 14 and a half years saved a life. The work that I've done for almost 20 years has saved countless lives, has positively impacted thousands and thousands of people's lives. And I can sit here at the age of 55 and say to both of you in your community that I know my purpose in life. And my purpose in life, and I say this hand on heart, is to continue to do the work that I do. Because outside of being the best dad that I can to 3 kids, there's nothing more rewarding or satisfying knowing that the work that we do every day, every week, month, year, has the chance and potential of positively impacting a person's life, but more importantly, has the potential of saving people's lives. And I love what I do.
No, that's thank you for the intro.
Oh, thanks.
That's a great intro. Very noble what you're doing. So here's the question, right? What's with athletes always being in depression? Like, it's so common amongst athletes.
Yeah.
Now, we have our own theories, but I'd love to hear maybe your thoughts. Maybe we're just thinking too deep, but I feel like a lot of athletes during their career and a lot of depression and post-career as well. And obviously you're an athlete, so would you be able to give us a...
Yeah, the little bit that I'd add in there is I was an athlete, and that used to define who I was.
Okay.
So I'm not going to I don't want to speak on the behalf of any other athlete, male or female, but what I would suggest is, or what I would put forward is that it's not just athletes, high achievers, creative people, musicians, artists, performers, successful businessmen and women, people that have achieved to a high level in their chosen field, perhaps are predisposed to experiencing these conditions, because we're talking about, in an athletic sense, we're talking about alpha athletes, alpha individuals, driven, determined, perfectionist, obsessive, very demanding of themselves. So maybe they have a predisposition to be exposed or experience some of these conditions. That's a question mark. But I think part of the challenge is, and I had a conversation recently with the president of one of the two clubs that I played with. And one of the things that I shared with this person was part of the problem that I see with elite sport of any code is that we sometimes mistakenly only see the athlete in the person. So if I was to put myself in that situation, what does that mean? Well, when I came into the environment, I was a 17-year-old skinny kid from country Victoria, and I was reasonably talented at football. So what I see consistently, and what I saw for a long time with my code, AFL, was that people would see the 17-year-old skinny kid, very quick, good mark, great skills, needs to put weight on, runs really well, but that's all they saw. So what happens is we institutionalise athletes as athletes and only athletes. What we don't see and what we're not recognising, and hopefully it's changing because I haven't been close to the game for a long time, but we need to understand that behind that person, behind that athlete, there's a person. There's a person that has vulnerabilities. There's a person that has experiences in life that they're bringing into the environment. Some of those experiences might be traumatic. They may be able to cope with stress on a football field, but they may not be coping with stresses in life. And my story exemplifies that, because at the height of my sporting career, in 1996, I became a premiership player with North Melbourne. We defeated the Sydney Swans. And to everybody bar two people in my life, anyone would have rightly assumed that that was an amazing experience and time in my life. And it is, I can say that. But when I walked on up to the premiership dais and collected my premiership medal, I didn't want to live. I was grappling with a 4-year battle with suicidal ideation. So I drove a nice car. I lived in a nice house in a nice suburb. I was getting paid reasonably well relative to the money that was in the game at that time. And on the surface, you could have assumed that, wow, how good must his life be? But the message in all of that, and this is a long-winded answer, there aren't any short answers. That's what I'm learning about these topics. As much as I want to give short answers, there aren't, because this is a really broad, wide-ranging set of challenges that people grapple with. But I had all the material possessions in the world, but I wasn't happy. I was unhappy. I was emotionally broken. I was spiritually lost. I saw no positive thing in my life, and I wasn't contributing anything which was positive. So I think the nature of elite sports is great for the opportunity, but we have a responsibility and opportunity to ensure that not only do we create the environment that gives the athlete, male or female, the best opportunity of being successful as an athlete, But we have a bigger responsibility to ensure that once the athlete leaves the game, whenever that is, they're a better person. We are responsible for human beings. But if we see them as athletes and athletes only, we're doing a disservice to those young men and women because we are institutionalising them. And when they leave the game, they will struggle as a broad representation. And from my experience, it took me 7 years to understand who I was beyond the athlete, because all of the information, all of the feedback, all of the conversations that I received from the age of 17 until 2002 was about my athletic performance. So what happens is you see yourself as that person. But I went through a process over 7 years to understand, who am I beyond that? What are my values? What's important to me? I didn't have a sense of that. Whereas now I have a very clear understanding, and that's why I said when you asked the opening question, Ali, and I don't say this just disrespectfully, but I don't want to be defined by my football career. I want to be respected and understood for the work that I do now, because the football career component of my life is a chapter, but that's not representative of who I am. I'm much bigger than that, and I don't say that in a self-indulgent way, but I understand who I am now. I understand my values. I understand my purpose. That chapter has helped me do the work that I do today. So I hope that's answered the question, but I wouldn't limit it to athletes. I would suggest that successful people in any area, any vocation in life, would grapple with these things. But athletes are news, so perhaps they get more of the attention.
I want to pick your mind or your thoughts about confirmation bias, right? So you have a generation of people who grew up with very little to no awareness or conversation about mental health and mental well-being. That's generally our parents' generation. And for them, they're like, well, we turned out okay. We're reasonably successful. We've had good family lives, good careers, whatever. And we didn't give a bar about mental well-being or mental health. The notion of depression, anxiety, stress, they were just natural emotions that we grappled with. We didn't label them. And all you generation have done is that you've gotten very good at attaching labels and associating therapies and medicine to those things. So that's usually the big cop-out that we see within our community, particularly the older generation. And it's from my perspective, it's driven by that confirmation bias to say, okay, well, we did okay without it all, you can do the same. What do you have to say to challenge that notion?
Oh, good question, and thank you. What I would say is, first of all, what I'm about to respond with is not being critical of our parents, their parents, and previous generations. But I did a similar interview yesterday on another podcast. And I'm about to say the same thing. Our parents, if our parents are saying that we've put labels to them, well, I'd challenge that by saying, so have you. Labels of weak, soft, harden up, toughen up, get on with it. What are you carrying on about? That's the narrative. And it's been handed down through the generations. Now, I can't speak on the Muslim community's experiences. But what we used to do here in Australia was we institutionalised people that had mental health conditions. We put them in hospitals and shut them away from society. So and families and family members and communities and friends, we didn't talk about it. But they were there, but they were hidden, or they were ostracised into these mental health facilities. And I would add to what I've just shared, purely to challenge people to think. And I'm not going to tell anyone what to do, but I want to challenge people to think, even people within the Muslim community, the younger generation, the older generation. And I want to challenge them to think about it for a really important reason. We all live in Australia, and it's a great country. This is our home. But by the end of today, this conversation finishes. 9 Australians have ended their life. 6 of the 9 are men. And it's not a male or female issue. It's a societal issue. Tragically, men are 3 times more successful at achieving the outcome, but 3 times as many women are attempting the same outcome. So if we don't believe that this is a serious issue, which we all have a role to play if we want to, because what I can say with great confidence is mental health conditions do not discriminate. They are impacting Muslim people today, like they are Maori people, which I am one, and Australians, and Lebanese, and Greek, and Italian, and people from all over this global planet of ours. And if we don't believe that this is serious and these are legitimate conditions, we're not recognising that there are people within our own communities who are grappling with these legitimate medical conditions. So I think conversations like this are really important because they begin to open up dialogue. And how is it different if a person is an asthmatic? Or like one of my daughters, she's a type 1 diabetic. She requires insulin every day to manage her condition. Or a woman who is in the middle of dealing with breast cancer, or a man who's dealing with prostate cancer, or any other of the normal health conditions. I'm going to assume, correct me if I'm wrong, but within the Muslim community, those conditions are acknowledged as legitimate. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Then so are mental health conditions. So if we're willing, irrespective of culture and community, to acknowledge those other legitimate conditions as legitimate, and we support people because they're going through those challenges, then any Muslim man or woman of any age who's going through mental health conditions, in my belief, as a basic fundamental right of a human being, deserves the same support and acceptance. And I think it's really important that we begin to open up these conversations. And the older generations may not understand it and may be uncomfortable talking about it. But when we talk about it like we are today, we're normalising the conversations. So there will be people that watch this conversation at some point who are Muslim-based, or that they're a Muslim person. This gives them hope. A conversation like this gives them connection. It gives them permission to start to think about, what can I do to look after myself? Who can I talk to that I trust, that I can get some support from to deal with something that is really, really difficult? And it's potentially life-saving. And I've seen it over nearly 20 years of working in this space. The vast majority of people that grapple with these conditions do one of two things. They do nothing because they're petrified of what the response will be, or they won't know what to do. And when people lose hope and connection, they start to think that they've only got one option left, and that is to potentially think about ending their life. They don't have to. So whether or not the older generation think this is real, it's real. It's really real. And it affects anyone from any community, from any culture, from any base, any religion, any sexuality. They don't discriminate. So I think it's really important for everybody to start to think about our individual mental health, but also if someone in my family or my community is struggling, park the judgment, park the old rhetoric, park what I think that I want to say about it, and just ask that person, are you okay? What can I do to help you? Because if we don't, we'll continue to lose people. And tragically, some of those people could be Muslim. It doesn't have to happen.
You know, Wayne, I love what you're saying, but when it comes to guys, like, we feel like it's a sign of weakness, I guess, letting things out.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that personally. Well, I would not open up to anyone.
Why
no
not?
matter how depressed I am.
Why not?
It's just
Stigma.
Yeah, it's like
The
you're
stigma is
gonna
real.
be judged.
Mm-hmm.
In this day and age, people love gossiping, so they're gonna take that, spread it everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't know, I just feel like it's a sign of weakness.
Whether or not you have a mental health condition, human beings are going to judge us anyway, and they'll talk, and they'll criticise us, and they'll say things about us. I appreciate your answer, Ali. I just interviewed the interviewers or the hosts, but this is a really important. This is a really, really important topic. I was diagnosed on the 9th of August 1993 with depression. I spent the next 12 years doing everything I could to hide it. And when I say everything, every day, I invested all of my energy into a facade of lies. In 12 years, 4 people knew the truth. My ex-wife, the doctor who diagnosed me in 1993, who up until November of last year was still my GP, a man by the name of Dr. Harry Younglick, and he is a man that I have openly said that I love him as much as my dad, with both of them in the same audience, because my ex-wife and my doctor kept me alive. They gave me hope and they gave me connection. Third person was the doctor at the Sydney Swans. 6 years after diagnosis, I asked for help. And then a beautiful lady psychologist in Sydney, Dr. Lisa Lampe, who I spent 4.5 years with, working really hard to understand the conditions and slowly reclaim my health. But for 12 years, I never talked to my dad or my mum, sister, family, friends, teammates, coaches, support staff, employers, anybody. Why? For the same reasons you didn't or you don't. For 12 years, I assumed if I took the chance or the risk and told people what I was living with, the risk was too high because I felt and believed, I believed. Because I told myself this story every day for 12 years. If we were friends or brothers or teammates and I told both of you, I was convinced that you would judge me, see me as weak, lose respect, I'd lose the relationships. For 12 years I did that. What I've learnt, all the things I believed and convinced myself that I would lose, I didn't lose. But what I lost was the opportunity to bring those people into my life, explain to them what I was going through, give them the opportunity of choosing what they wanted to do. And what I've learnt through that process is that people who genuinely care about you may not completely understand it, but they'll do everything they can to support you. So to anybody, male or female, but in particular to the men out there, how is it weak when my 27-year marriage ended in March of 2020, going into COVID, and I cried because my marriage ended? How am I weak as a male that as a result of the marriage ending, my relationships with my 3 kids changed negatively? With one of my daughters, to quote her, she hated me. I cried. It was painful. How is it weak of me as a business owner in August of 2020 living in Melbourne when the state government locked down non-essential businesses so we had a month's worth of payroll left? I challenge it. I'm a human being that goes through a range of different experiences in life, similar to all of us. If we haven't already, we will at some point. How is somebody who's going through really challenging, upsetting experiences, who taps into their emotions and cries weak? I really challenge that motive and that thinking, because I was one of those. I believed for most of my adult life that crying was for weak people. And in a gender, sort of adopting a gender lens here, which I don't like to do, but in a football context, if you cried and you were a player, you were as weak as piss. Sorry to swear. And we didn't cry because we were conditioned not to cry. And I didn't cry because I didn't want to lose respect. I wanted my teammates to love me. I wanted them to trust me. I wanted them to believe in me. But if you cried, you were seen as not manly enough. I don't subscribe to that anymore. I've cried more in the last 6 years than I ever have in my entire life. And I haven't said sorry once. And I won't to anyone. Because what am I saying sorry for? That's how I was brought up. That's what I was taught. It's not about blame or responsibility. But what I mean by that is I've been presenting all over the country for 20 years, nearly 20 years. And I will ask audiences, which tend to be mixed genders, to stand up if you can remember a time when you were around the age of 8, 9 or 10 and you did something as a boy or a girl and you hurt yourself, you felt pain, you cried. I'll ask audiences to stand up if they can remember an experience like that. 98 to 99% of audiences will stand up. And guess what? Almost all the men do. And then I'll follow up and ask them, stay standing if you've continued to behave the way as a young boy or a young girl now that you're a grown man or grown woman. Less than 10% of the audience will stay standing. Why do I share that? Because there's this narrative which still gets perpetuated that males don't behave that way. It's not true. It's not true. We're born different genders, obviously, but human beings are born with this beautiful capacity of being emotionally connected and emotionally expressive. How do I know that? Every time I engage with an audience, I ask the questions, and 98 to 99% of people stand up, including most of the men. It's not something that the women in our lives do. Some of them do, some of them don't. But we're born with the same capacity. And then tragically and unfairly, what happens is it gets conditioned out of us. By the time you grow up, you're not expected to behave that way. Well, a marriage breaks down. We don't get to see our kids. A parent passes away. We have to relocate to another country and we're on our own. We're human beings. We're supported and encouraged to tap into certain emotions, but we're discouraged and conditioned and sometimes criticised for tapping into other emotions. One of the most important messages that I am committed to sharing with people is to encourage people to reconnect emotionally and take the chance of tapping into all of your emotions. Because when you're emotionally disconnected, you don't have an ability of regulating what you're going through. And you may not have a language which allows you to talk to people about challenging experiences. And that was my experience. And I've connected to all of my emotions. I'm 55. Obviously, I'm male, played football, father, son, partner, friend, business owner. I will challenge anybody that thinks that I'm weak because I'm emotional. I'm not. I'm an emotionally connected human being, and that's empowering.
When you talk about emotional connectivity, then, do you feel that these days, because we live through a social lens, we live behind a computer, that's our way of connecting to people now. It's not what it used to be once upon a time.
Yeah.
And also, particularly amongst men, and I think amongst all genders, people tend to, I guess, bury a lot of that emotional connectivity that they need, their body requires them to have, behind other coping mechanisms. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be I don't know, just writing at home behind a screen and binging on TV shows or whatever it is, anything to sort of distract their mind or drive their attention away from what their body actually needs. How can we better manage our lifestyle these days to ensure that we get that fair share of human interaction and connectivity? Because society somehow, or our lifestyle, pushes us in the other direction and says, okay, well, you don't need to work in an office setting. You can work from home. You'll be more productive, whatever it is, less travel time or whatever. But we're discounting the importance of that interpersonal relationship, that interhuman connectivity that we so desperately, based on what you're saying, we so desperately require.
Yeah, there's a lot in that, Muzza. A lot in what you've just asked. The first thing that I would say is what is innate to every human being globally right now, today, is connection. Sense of belonging, a sense of connection. Go back centuries. We used to travel around the world in small pockets of people. We did everything together. Now we live in this world that's been infiltrated and infected by technology, some good, some not. So what that means is it's splitting us. It's separating us, putting distance between us. Technology has value. It does connect us in one sense, but it's also disconnecting us. And what I mean by that is I look at my kids of their generation, twin daughters about to turn 21, a 17-year-old son. Their ability to resolve conflict personally is very limited or none at all. Conflict is dealt with on a screen. But when I grew up, we went outside and played. If there was an issue, we had to talk about it. We had to deal with that. So you developed an ability to communicate with other people. We've lost that in a lot of ways. I think also one of the things that you mentioned in your question, Muzza, was suppressing things. I used alcohol, I used drugs, I used a lot of things, and they were maladaptive coping strategies. But through that process, and I'm not saying that to glorify those things, those strategies are not healthy or helpful. And I used alcohol and drugs for a long time because they were the only things I thought I had available to me. But what they were really doing was masking the underlying issues that I didn't want to deal with. And what I've learnt, and I work with a psychologist I have for the last 4.5 years, and I continue to do it because what's been really important is when, and this is my experience, but if we don't deal with challenging experiences or in some instances traumatic experiences and we bury them, if we're not willing to deal with them at some point in our life, life will force us to deal with it. What do I mean by that? I'm now of the view, firming view, that my mental health conditions were the manifestation of an unregulated nervous system from a very young age as a child through to my adult life. There's a lot of information available that would suggest it could be genetic, it could be hereditary, it could be situational, environmental, it could be as a result of a range of different experiences that people go through. And I, up until recently, have not spent much time trying to understand why, but I'm a ferocious reader. I read a lot of books on trauma in particular. And when I apply what I've read and what I'm learning to my own life experience, from a very young age, my nervous system was unregulated, which means it's in this heightened state of flight or fight constantly. And I didn't recognise it at the time. I didn't have a traumatic childhood in the sense of there was no physical abuse, there was no violence, there was no sexual abuse. And what I see consistently, again, not to be critical, but what I've learned is the vast majority of people live an unconscious life. So we just go through life and we're not really thinking about it. We're not consciously thinking about what we're doing, what we're saying, choices that we make. So we're on autopilot. I'm living a life and I'm learning to live a life which is conscious. What do I think? What do I say? And what do I do? First and foremost for myself, but for all of the other important people in my life. In order to get to that position, which has taken 30 years, I've had to go back into my past and unpack things. Sometimes that can be hard, that can be challenging, and that can be really uncomfortable. But what that allows you to do is it allows you to reconcile some things that have happened in your life and begin to look at life differently through a different lens and make different decisions. And I'll share something with the two of you and your community. And up until yesterday, only less than a handful of people knew this. My beautiful partner, my dad, my mentor and my chairman and my psychologist. Up until earlier this year, and this might be surprising or difficult for people to understand and accept, but it's the truth. Up until the beginning of this year, I've lived my life performing for certain things from a very young age until 55. Attention, acceptance, validation, and love. I didn't have a traumatic childhood, but my parents, with no criticism or blame, weren't able to give me the love that I needed as a child to nurture me. What that meant was I rarely heard it, never saw it, never felt it. And what I did as a child was I interpreted that as I'm unlovable and I'm not worthy. And that has influenced my entire life. So everything that I've done with every important relationship, I've done it because I wanted to be validated and loved. And I've chased it. I no longer do that because I've worked really hard with my psych to unpack that. And what was the genesis for this was, why do I constantly feel insecure? Why do I feel like I'm not good enough? Why is my lens negative? Why am I so critical of myself? I've said things to myself that I would be horrified and mortified if I ever said it to another human being once. But I've spent my lifetime doing this. Because when I was young, I wanted to hear, feel and see the love of the important people in my life. And my parents were that. When I left home at the age of 17 and I went into the AFL system, I wanted my coach to love me. But the style of coach that I got was very negative and very toxic. So what did that do? Reinforce the core belief that I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable. So I share that because it reinforces, well, I hope that casts some light, Muzza, on when we suppress stuff, it will impact us and subconsciously we may not even see it. Why do my relationships end the way that they always end? Why am I behaving the way that I've constantly behaved? Why am I thinking negatively? Why do I doubt the people who are in my life who tell me that they love me and give me every reason to think that they love me, but I'm still saying I'm not lovable? So this is my experience. And I share that not to tell anyone what to do, but if you've gone through something and it's been traumatic, give yourself permission to lean into that with the right support and start to unpack it. Because one of the other things that I've learnt, Ali and Muzza, is it's through the tough challenges that we grow. I'm a better person for what I've gone through, even though it's been hard. I'm a better human. I'm a better dad, better partner, better son, better friend, better everything, better presenter, better version of myself, because I've taken the chance and I've given myself permission to reconnect with who I really am. And the irony of that is I knew from a really young age that I was a sensitive, emotional person. But I shut that away for most of my life because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be respected. And I was scared to be vulnerable. But now, the person that's sitting in front of you today this is me. And I'm comfortable with that. And being comfortable with that now allows me to be a better version of myself in all of those other important relationships. I'd love to give short answers, but I really struggle, so I'm really sorry.
It's really insightful. Very
deep.
insightful.
And
Yeah.
I'm gonna what you said about your parents not showing you as much love as you, I guess, needed.
It was nurturing love, Ali. I just needed the touch, the feel, and the word.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, and I love this quote, a parent can only give a child what they receive themselves. And on the weekend just gone, at the age of 55, I'm getting a little bit emotional about this. I sat down with my 81-year-old dad, who I love dearly, and we had a conversation for the first time in my life about love. And I've been grappling with this. Do I, don't I? I don't want him to think I'm blaming him. But if I don't say something about this, if I don't have this conversation and he eventually is no longer here, do I regret not having it? And if I don't have it, I'm not being true to myself. And it was through the process of looking back at my childhood with my psychologist. And what really, what was the tipping point for me to want to have this conversation with my dad without knowing how he'd interpret it, what would he respond, what would his response be, was the fact that every weekend my dad and I will go to watch my son play football. We get there in separate cars. And while I'm going there, I'm saying to myself, I'm going to hug him. I'm going to hug him. I'm going to tell him I love him. I'm going to tell him I love him. What do? Shake hands and say nothing. All the time.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with family members 20, 30 years ago about that. I want to tell my dad I love him, but I can't. I've never grown up with that. I know he loves me and he knows that I love him. But I finally got to a position where I need to be true to myself and sit down with my dad. And we sat down. I've shared some things that I've shared with you and your community today. And I explained to my dad that whatever time we've got left, it's important to me that I hug him and I tell him I love him. Not because I want my dad to change, but this is who I am and that's what's important to me. And my dad said during the conversation, he said, you know, when we shake hands or I spend time with you, that's my way of showing I love you. I go, I know that. But as your son, from a young age to now, I need to hear those words from time to time. I've always wanted my dad's validation. He's the most important male in my life. And it's probably the same for you and for the Muslim men. I have lived a life wanting my dad to love me. And I said to him in the conversation, my dad worked, like our dads did, worked multiple jobs, rarely saw him. I said, I know that was your way of showing me that you love me. But what I wanted was I wanted my dad to play with me. I wanted my dad to give me time, just to spend time with me. So, you know, I think it's something that we as men, males, probably grapple with, irrespective of culture and religion. We probably grapple with a lot of the same things. I'm just grateful that I took the chance to have the conversation with my dad.
I'm going to get a bit personal here and bring my dad into this topic. And
Good.
he watches all the pods and stuff, right?
What's your dad's name?
Hakan.
Hakan.
He's the boss over here. But the reason I'm going to bring it up is the relationship between my dad and my brother. It's like they could relate to this like big time, because my brother always complains to him saying, "You don't love me. You never love me," blah blah blah. Right? I guess what advice would you give a parent or a dad? We'll use a dad as an example. When a kid wants love, and you just refuse, maybe out of pride or because you're a manly man, you don't want to stoop to that level of, hey, I'm gonna love my child and look like a, I don't know,
Marshmallow.
yeah, marshmallow.
Too soft.
Right? I got to be an alpha man and, tough love, as they label it. They label it as tough love, right? But my brother always says, you show love, blah, blah. And it's affected him, right? He's, 31 now? And he holds on to this problem ever since he was a child. So for 31 years of his life, it's like, you haven't shown me love. Just show me love for once in your life, for Christ's sake. It's come to that point. And my dad refuses to show love, right? What advice would you give, Mr. Hakan Ozion, to, I guess, show love to everyone else out there that's in this same, I guess, situation?
I'd preface this by saying to your dad, I'm not criticising him. I don't want you to take this as criticism, because it's not intended to be. But before I answer that question, Ali, what was your dad's childhood like? What was his father like, your grandfather?
It's the same, unloving. Yeah.
And then your grandfather's father was probably the same.
Most likely, yeah.
So it's not that, I don't believe that your dad doesn't want to. But I think there's merit in suggesting that perhaps your dad doesn't have the capability to show that love. Because the quote I shared before, a parent can only give a child what that parent received themselves as a child. So I don't believe a parent does not want to love their child, but I do believe parents are limited with the capacity to show and display love because they never experienced it themselves. I think that's an important thing to share. I would encourage your dad and any dad. What I'm hearing with you talking about your brother is there's a little boy in your 31-year-old brother that desperately wants dad's love. He wants to feel validated. He wants to be seen. He wants to feel worthy, deserving, and lovable. Your brother's story's mine, and I'm 55. So I would encourage your dad and your brother, but I'd also encourage you, Ali, and anyone else in the family, sit down and just have a conversation. I've had conversations with my dad over the last couple of years to understand his childhood. What was it like? What was your relationship like with your dad? What was it like with your mum? And my dad's relationship with his mum, she's no longer here, was really close. And my dad's relationship with his father, my grandfather, it was challenging, big family. But my grandfather, Roy, didn't have the emotional capacity or bandwidth to be a loving dad because he grew up with a similar dad. So it's not, I'm not trying to tell your dad what to do, but I would encourage your dad and your brother and everybody else, including you, Ali, open up dialogue. Because if your brother spends his life chasing it, it will continue to impact him. Mm-hmm. And it's impacting him now. Because his self-worth and his self-value is contingent on his dad. And what I'm hearing is, just like my story, I desperately wanted my dad just to love me. I wanted to hear those words. And it might be, and the other thing, and I reflect on this a lot, Muzza and Ali, we're approaching Are You OK Day. And we hear the words, we want you to turn up to work as your authentic self. We want you to be vulnerable. We want you to have the conversation. And what I've reflected on is we're asking a lot of people to do something they've never done in their life. How do you be vulnerable if you've never been vulnerable? How do you find vulnerability or connect to vulnerability if you don't feel that you're in a safe environment? How do you become more authentic and turn up as your authentic self if every day, like the vast majority who are living on the planet today, we have a shower, put our clothes on, and then we put the armour on and the mask? Because we come to work and we don't want people to know the true version of ourselves because we're petrified of what they'll think or say. And how do people, men, sit down and have a conversation like this if they've never had one? How do I have the words? How do I develop a language which allows me to communicate about these topics? I had a nervous breakdown on the 26th of July 1993, 2 weeks before I was diagnosed. Sat in the car for an hour and a half once I got home from training, walked inside, sat next to my fiancée and didn't say a single word. Not because I didn't want to. I'd never talked about emotions, vulnerability and feelings. I had one of these conversations when I was 35. The first one. So how do we encourage men to talk? Well, first of all, we create the environment that's safe. And we support men and women to begin to explore and experiment and develop the words or identify the words and start to cobble together a language which allows us to talk. But I'm going to assume that your dad and your brother have never sat down and talked about this. Have they?
Oh, I would not think they did. Even if they did, probably ended up in a fight.
Right?
All I know.
But coming together, not to argue, not to win, not to say you're right and I'm wrong, but to open up dialogue. Clearly, based on what you've shared, this is fundamentally important to your brother, the love of his dad. It would seem that your dad's capacity to love his son in a manner that he wants is limited. But if they both sit down as men and have a conversation, help me understand your position. Help me understand what you need. Help me understand why this is so important. But also going back the other way, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm needing. It begins to connect them at a level. Why can't men love each other? I have a 17-year-old son. I love him.
You tell him you love
I
him?
tell him.
You tell him?
I show him. I communicate it. And I've been doing it from a young age for him. We have conversations. He's a 17-and-a-half-year-old one-word grunter. If you haven't had kids, you'll know it if you have a boy at some point. Very economical with what he says. But we open up dialogue, and I have done it since he was 10. Why? Because I want my son, who will grow up to be a man who may get married and may have kids, to understand that these are conversations that males have too. And emotions are things that males have too. It's not something that just his sisters or his mother display. I will do everything I can as a flawed parent to empower my children, including my son, to be emotionally connected and expressive. And I will challenge the rhetoric and narrative that wants to suggest that men who are emotional are weak. No, they're not. They're human beings. And I don't say this lightly, but I don't want this to be interpreted as self-indulgent, but I'm committed to breaking the cycle within my family. I want to empower my children, their children, and their future grandchildren and the generations that come after us to be able to be emotionally connected and emotionally expressive human beings. If we could heal trauma globally, we heal the world. Period.
That's really powerful. I have a question from a parenting perspective. I'm a parent. Ali's a parent. I think we're all parents.
You're too young to be a parent, Muzza. Are you a parent too? How many kids?
Both fathers of 2 girls.
Really?
Yeah, 2 kids.
Oh, good luck. Good luck.
Sounds ominous. I wonder, you see a lot of dads in particular who make the claim or make a statement that says that you have to earn my love. You have to earn my love. What do you have to say to that? Because I think extending to Ali's point as well about his dad, and a lot of that generation seem to think, well, my love it's not something that I just dole out willy-nilly. You need to live your life in a particular way. You need to achieve certain things or whatever it is to earn my love and then to maintain that commitment of love that I have towards you. Because it's very common within our community that if you choose to live your life in a way that doesn't conform with what I consider to be acceptable or agreeable or whatever it is, my love for you will diminish and decrease. if you don't respect me or serve me or whatever it is that I require from you as my child, then my love or my commitment towards you diminishes. It's whether that's common in other cultures, I'm assuming it is, but it's very, very prevalent. Would you not say?
It's very transactional, to be honest.
Within our communities, that it's a commodity, it's exchanged.
It's a great question. I don't think it's limited to your community. Love's not a commodity. It's not something to be transacted. And in that question, Mazza, if love is conditional, it's going to damage your children. If a child grows up learning that love can be given and taken away, the risk of that is the child starts to believe they are unlovable and not deserving. That will fundamentally impact their life in negative ways. And I don't believe parents would consciously want to do that. But that was my childhood experience. I learnt that love could be given, but love could be taken away. And the other thing that I would say from my experience as a father, my kids don't owe me anything. My job as a parent is to love them unconditionally. My job as a parent is to empower my children to live their life, not mine. I'm responsible for my life. And my kids, like ours, have and will make mistakes. Doesn't mean they don't respect me and they don't love me. They're human. My role as a father is to accept that they will make mistakes. My role as a father sometimes is to let them make mistakes, knowing that they will make a mistake, but don't try to fix it. Because that's how they learn. And I have worked really hard over 4.5 years to re-establish relationships with my kids post-divorce. I've got twin daughters who are turning 21 this week. And the greatest gift a child can give you, but a daughter or daughters can give their dad, is their trust. My relationships with my daughters are the best they've ever been, and I haven't lived with them for 4.5 years. Why? Because I've loved them unconditionally. I turn up every day, even when it's hard, even when I don't want to, I still turn up. And even though there might be difficult conversations, and there's been a lot, and we have to have challenging discussions, love sits there constantly. It's not something that comes or goes. It's in, it's out, it's off the table, it's on the table. It's not. My children know that no matter what happens in their life, that is a not negotiable from me, even when things are challenging or things are hard. And because of the way that I've constantly and consciously shown up in the lives of my children with my daughters trust me with stuff that they would normally talk to their mother or another woman with. That's the greatest gift a dad can get. And that's because love is a not negotiable commodity. It's not even a commodity. It is a staple of everything that I'm doing with my kids. So to any parents out there, I don't believe our kids deliberately want to disrespect or not show love. But I know what I was like as a 16, 17-year-old. I had no idea. And we just do things. Sometimes we're not thinking. Our brain's not engaged. We're not consciously trying to upset parents. But as a child, we make mistakes. We do things. I would strongly encourage the parents that think that love is a commodity and it can be given or taken away to stop, slow down, and just ask yourself why. I would suggest that for a lot of those parents, it's because that's what they learnt. But if we hand that down through the generations, we're going to continue to impact our children in the way that we've been impacted as kids ourselves. Doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be. Love should be the foundation of everything. Everything we do, everything we create, everything we have.
I'm not going to lie, Wayne. Look, we had so much questions to ask. Different topics.
Yeah.
Poor Wayne, he always prepares the questions, different topics. This has been so deep.
Yeah.
It's just we've been stuck on the same topic for so long. But it's been a great chat. Honestly, Maz, if you don't have any last questions, I have one last thing that I would love to request from you. And that is, what advice would you give to everyone out there? or not that specific, more specific, just in terms of mental health, or one advice you could give someone in this crazy day and age we live in?
Yeah, what I would leave with your audience and community is what I've learned is that most adults will service their car before they start to think about servicing their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know that? Because I ask questions. 100% of audiences over 20 years who are adults that own cars service it. Maintain it, protect it, nurture it, care for it, but also prevent the likelihood of breakdown, illness and death. Our cars are important. But between 70 and 80% of the same audiences over 20 years are not servicing their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Why? So I would encourage people to accept that every single person that is part of your community that sees this conversation right now, right here, has mental health. Don't wait until it becomes problematic before you stop and think about what you can do. We prioritise our physical health to maintain it, to protect it, to nurture it, to care for it, but also to prevent illness, breakdown and death. Apply the same strategies or different strategies to your mental health. And when we do that, we can be in a healthy position for longer, more often, and people can hopefully do all the things that they want to do in their lifetime and achieve and experience all the things that they want to do in their lifetime. But mental health conditions do not discriminate.
Mm.
They will impact, and they do impact, and they have impacted people that live within the Muslim community, and those people need the same support as everybody else.
Mm. It's a great way to end it.
Yeah.
Mazza,
Thank you so
any
much.
last
No,
questions?
No, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I
Wayne,
really
it's-
appreciate it.
Everything. This is probably the first pod where I could relate to everything that you said.
Mm.
Right.
Like I could relate to everything that you said. Your mother would know. Like he's like a brother to me, right? We've known each other for so long. He could relate to that, and he could relate it to our families and whatnot. It's an amazing way of explaining it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's very deep.
Can I finish by asking one quick question to both of you? What will both of you do from this conversation? What will you take away, and what will you do for yourselves?
I think for me, what I've been battling the most was, or currently is speaking about the problems. And I think I just got to explore a way to, I guess, speak up more. It's going to be hard. It's going to be very, very hard.
What's the risk? What's the biggest risk for
And
you to
for
speak
me,
up?
I hate, there's two things that I hate. Being judged and things spreading around.
Gossip.
Gossip.
Mhm.
Those two I absolutely hate.
Can I ask a follow-up question to you? I still want to get your answer, Mazza. Who judges you the most?
Dad.
Who judges you the harshest?
Dad.
Yeah. Do you judge yourself harshly?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm probably the thing, yeah. 100%.
See? I would encourage you to think about having a conversation with someone other than your dad to begin with.
Right.
You can have a conversation with dad when you think that it's right and you feel like you're in a position where you can have that conversation. But take the chance and find somebody that you feel that you could trust, that would be understanding and accepting of you talking honestly, because you deserve it.
No, I appreciate that.
And I'll be disappointed if you don't.
I'll
In a
let you know.
constructive way. Mazza, what
I
about...
want to talk to you at this point. I know. Just talk. Let's go. Give me a number.
What,
therapeutic.
what about you, Mazza?
So I asked that question about that love being a commodity, transactional, because I've been told many a time in my life that I can be quite transactional in a lot of my relationships.
Yep.
And because of being an entrepreneur, business person, whatever it is, you naturally have a defense mechanism up all the time because you're always afraid of someone taking advantage of your kindness, of your generosity, or whatever it is. Everyone sees you as a means to an end. And that might be true for some relationships in my life, but I need to be very conscious, especially off the back of what you're saying now, about ensuring that I don't reflect that same attitude or behavior towards my children. My girls are 7 and 9. They're at an age where they understand and they can relate and they have that emotional awareness. And yes, I do, I guess, tell myself that I do what I do and that I sacrifice what I sacrifice because I love them, etc., etc. But I probably don't explicitly state that to them often enough. Like, yes, the hug over here, the gift over there, the celebration of an event in their life or whatever it is a token, whatever it is. But that's largely a material exchange. there has to be more of an emotional exchange.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm gleaning from this conversation
Yeah.
today. Because otherwise, I would hate for them to grow up to feel that they're unlovable or unworthy, or all the things that you've described. Because again, like I wasn't brought up that way. I had that. I had very caring, invested, loving, emotional parents who instilled that in me. And I feel that my wife probably has the same thing as well. So I want to ensure that I'm passing that on to my children, and that it doesn't stop with me.
Yeah, and look, I appreciate the candour of your respective responses. I have been one of those dads that worked multiple jobs, and that was my way of showing my kids. Doesn't tell them that I love them.
Yeah.
Greatest gift we've got with our kids is our time.
Yeah.
And, you know, as a fellow entrepreneur, I understand the challenges, but the way that I've communicated and connected with both of you today is the way I run my business. This is who I am. And if people want to take advantage of me, people want to think negatively, that's okay. But I know that I'm being true to myself. And I would encourage both of you to take what you've just shared and begin to implement that, or begin to have those conversations, because it's fundamentally important to both of you. But by extension, when we're healthy and well, the value and benefit goes to all of the other important people, including our kids. So it's been a good chat.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of fun.
Appreciate
It's been a great chat.
Thank you for your questions.
No, thank you,
Yeah.
Wayne. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank
Yeah.
you for coming on the Out of Interest podcast, and we wish you nothing but the best,
Thank you.
and good luck in everything you do, and hopefully you be happy for the rest of your life, and the kids love you, and you keep telling your kids that you love them, and they keep telling you. Actually, I don't even remember the last time I told my dad I love him at this point,
Well, once
because he always asks me on a daily. You'd probably say, "You love your dad, don't you?" I'm like, no, not happening. I'm not saying I can't be weak. Again, I got that off him though. Like, he's such a tough man that I just mirror how he is. So
he's a
it's good.
condition. He's a conditioned man.
Yeah,
That's how he's been conditioned.
yeah. So everything you said is literally spot on.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
I hope you guys all enjoyed it. If you guys did, give us a like, subscribe, give us a review as well. It means the world to us, and we'll see you guys in the next one.